Montana Territory, 1885. The blood-orange sun dipped behind the jagged mountain peaks, painting Xavier Vaughn's weathered fence posts with a crimson hue that matched the color of his dwindling bank account. At 25, Xavier had inherited the Double V Ranch 2 years too early, when consumption claimed his father with the same ruthless efficiency it had taken his mother 4 years prior. Now, as he calculated the weeks until foreclosure, he realized good intentions and hard work weren't enough to save the 1,000 acres his family had carved from Montana's unforgiving landscape. Last chance, Vaughn. Lawrence Whitaker had told him just yesterday, the banker's gold pocket watch glinting as menacingly as his smile. 30 days to make good on your loan, or I'll personally see that Railroad Consortium gets your water rights. Xavier drove his shovel into the parched earth, attempting to repair the irrigation ditch that had collapsed during last week's flash flood. His strong arms worked mechanically, his lean frame moving with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd grown up on horseback. Sweat darkened his chestnut hair and dampened his light cotton shirt, which clung to his broad shoulders. You need at least 10 men for spring planting and repairs, his foreman had warned before leaving for better wages in Bozeman. Can't run this spread alone, no matter how stubborn you are. The distant rumble of wagon wheels pulled Xavier from his grim calculations. Visitors were rare on this stretch of prairie, especially as dusk approached. Shielding his eyes against the setting sun, he spotted an approaching wagon, weather-beaten and listing badly, one wheel wobbling precariously with each rotation. Xavier reached for his rifle, more from habit than fear. The territory had grown safer since his childhood, but caution kept men alive. As the wagon drew closer, he made out 4 figures, a man holding the reins, a woman beside him, and what appeared to be 2 small children huddled in the back. The wagon lurched to a stop 20 yards away. The driver, thin to the point of gauntness, with haunted eyes set in a sunburned face, raised his empty hands. "Evening, sir," the man called, his voice carrying a hint of an Eastern accent. "Joseph Lawson. My family and I are looking for work. Any direction you might point us would be appreciated." Xavier lowered his rifle. The family's desperation was palpable, written in their threadbare clothes and hollow cheeks. The woman turned, and Xavier's breath caught. Despite the dust of travel and simple, faded dress, she possessed a quiet beauty that seemed to defy their obvious hardship. Her amber-colored hair was pulled back in a practical bun, though tendrils had escaped to frame a face that, while weary, held a dignity that impressed him immediately. "Your will won't make another mile," Xavier said, nodding toward the wagon. "You're welcome to make camp by the creek tonight. Water your horses." Relief washed over the man's face. "Much obliged. We won't be any trouble." As the family made their modest camp, Xavier found himself watching the woman. She moved with purpose, organizing their meager belongings while simultaneously comforting the youngest child, a girl no more than 4. The older child, a boy perhaps 7, helped his father tend to their bony horses. An idea began to form in Xavier's mind. Desperate, perhaps, but no more desperate than his situation. He approached their camp as the woman stirred a small pot of what appeared to be watery stew. "Mr. Lawson," Xavier began, removing his hat. "I'm Xavier Vaughn. This is my ranch you've stopped on." He paused, uncertain how to make his offer without sounding like charity. "I find myself short-handed, with spring planting coming and repairs needed after the winter. If you're truly looking for work, we are," the man said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "I worked a farm in Pennsylvania before we came west." The woman looked up sharply, a flicker of something, warning? Fear, passing between her and her husband. Xavier noted the exchange, but continued. "I can offer room and board in the old bunkhouse, plus $10 a month. Not much, but it's what I can spare until fall harvest." Before Joseph could respond, the woman stood, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'm Kathleen Lawson," she said, her voice stronger than her frame suggested. "I can cook, sew, and garden. The children can help with chores." She looked directly at Xavier, her hazel eyes assessing him with unexpected shrewdness. "Your offer is fair, Mr. Vaughn, and we accept." Joseph looked momentarily startled by his wife's forwardness, but nodded agreement. "We're grateful, Mr. Vaughn." That night, as Xavier returned to his empty house, he wondered what he'd just done. He needed help, true, but taking on a family, clearly down on their luck and harboring secrets if he read their expressions correctly, was either an act of providence or foolishness. Either way, he had little to lose that wasn't already slipping through his fingers. What Xavier couldn't know was how the arrival of the Lawsons would unravel not just their secrets, but his own carefully constructed solitude, or how Kathleen's quiet strength would awaken something in him he'd thought buried alongside his parents. By the end of their first week at Double V Ranch, Xavier had learned several things about the Lawsons. Joseph worked tirelessly from dawn until dusk, his thin frame belying surprising endurance. The children, Daniel and Emma, quickly adapted to ranch life, collecting eggs and helping with simple chores with the resilience only children possess. But it was Kathleen who proved most remarkable. The bunkhouse, unused since the last Cowboys left, had been transformed. Though sparsely furnished, it now bore the unmistakable touches of a home. Curtains fashioned from flour sacks, wildflowers in tin cans, and the constant aroma of fresh bread. More importantly, the main house, Xavier's house, had begun to change as well. "You needn't cook for me," Xavier had protested when Kathleen first appeared at his door with a covered dish 3 days after their arrival. "Nonsense," she'd replied, moving past him into a kitchen that hadn't seen a woman's touch in years. "Cooking for one more is no trouble, and it appears you've been surviving on coffee and jerky." Now, as he sat at his own table eating rabbit stew, Xavier watched Kathleen move efficiently around his kitchen, putting away the few clean dishes. Afternoon sunlight streamed through windows recently wiped clear of dust, illuminating the simple blue cotton of her dress and casting golden highlights in her hair. "May I ask what brought you to Montana?" Xavier ventured, breaking the comfortable silence. Kathleen's hands stilled momentarily before she continued her work. Joseph believed there would be opportunities here. After the war and the panic of '73, Pennsylvania offered little for a man without property or prospects. "And you? What did you believe?" She turned, a sad smile touching her lips. "I believed in following my husband, Mr. Vaughn. That's what wives do." There was more to their story, Xavier was certain of it. The way Joseph startled at unexpected sounds, how Kathleen sometimes gazed eastward with longing, the careful way they answered questions about their past, all suggested complications beyond economic hardship. "The children seem to be adjusting well," Xavier said, changing the subject. Kathleen's expression softened. "Children adapt more easily than adults. Emma has already adopted every stray creature she can find, and Daniel speaks of nothing but horses." She hesitated. "They've had difficulties. This stability means everything to them." Before Xavier could press further, the kitchen door burst open, and Daniel rushed in, his face flushed with excitement. "Mr. Vaughn, Pa says to tell you the north fence is fixed, but there's Rustler's sign near the creek bend." Xavier stood immediately. "Rustler's? Fresh tracks," Joseph confirmed, appearing in the doorway behind his son. His expression was grave. 5, maybe 6 riders. "Passed through last night, I'd guess." Xavier reached for his hat and gun belt. "I'll ride out." "Not alone," Joseph said firmly. "I'll come with you." Kathleen's face paled. "Joseph, it's necessary, Kate." He cut her off, using what Xavier assumed was a private endearment. "Mr. Vaughn has given us shelter. I won't let thieves take what's his." Something unspoken passed between the couple, a current of tension Xavier couldn't decipher. Finally, Kathleen nodded tightly and turned to Xavier. "Be careful," she said simply. "Both of you." As Xavier and Joseph rode toward the north pasture, the rancher studied the quiet man beside him. Joseph handled a horse well, not like a Pennsylvania farmer, but like someone who'd spent considerable time in the saddle. "You've ridden before," Xavier observed. Joseph kept his eyes on the horizon. "Cavalry. During the war. Union." A short nod was the only response. "That doesn't explain why a Union veteran and his family are wandering the Montana Territory with everything they own in a broken-down wagon," Xavier said carefully. Joseph's jaw tightened. "Some stories aren't meant to be shared, Mr. Vaughn. If there's trouble following you, I have a right to know. I've got my own problems without inviting others." For a long moment, Joseph said nothing. Then, "It's not what you think. We're not running from the law. But yes, there's trouble. The kind that follows a man who testified against powerful people." Before Xavier could respond, they crested the ridge overlooking the North Creek. Below, Exactly as Joseph had described, fresh hoof prints and disturbed earth indicated where riders had crossed Xavier's property, and where several cattle were now missing. The rustler's tracks had disturbed something else. Xavier's carefully maintained boundaries between himself and others. Now, with cattle stolen and mysteries deepening, he realized the Lawsons hadn't just brought help to his failing ranch. They'd breached the solitude he'd used as protection since becoming alone in the world. What troubled him more was how frequently his thoughts returned to Kathleen's sad smile and the quiet strength that seemed to hold her family together. A strength he found himself increasingly drawn to, despite the warning bells that accompanied Joseph's cryptic admission. 3 weeks after the Lawsons' arrival, Xavier's birthday passed without acknowledgement, exactly as he preferred. Since his parents' deaths, celebrations seemed hollow, unnecessary reminders of what he'd lost. He spent the day like any other, repairing fences, checking livestock, and calculating how to stretch his dwindling resources until fall. When he returned to the main house that evening, however, the scent of roasting meat greeted him. Inside, he found his table set with his mother's good china, dishes untouched since her funeral, and Kathleen sliding a fresh apple pie onto the sideboard. "What's all this?" he asked, standing awkwardly in his own kitchen. Kathleen smiled, smoothing her apron. She'd pinned her hair differently today, with a blue ribbon that matched her freshly pressed dress. "Emma mentioned that Daniel spotted the date on some papers in your study. We thought you might appreciate a proper meal for your birthday." Before Xavier could formulate a response that wouldn't sound ungrateful, the door opened again, and Joseph entered with the children. Daniel proudly carried a crudely wrapped package, while Emma clutched a bouquet of wildflowers. "Happy birthday, Mr. Vaughn," Emma announced, presenting the flowers with a formal curtsy that made Xavier smile despite himself. "We made you something," Daniel added, thrusting forward his package. Xavier unwrapped it carefully to reveal a hand-carved whistle and a leather bookmark. "These are fine gifts," he said, genuinely touched by their thoughtfulness. "The dinner is from all of us," Joseph said. He looked more at ease than Xavier had yet seen him, though still watchful. "It's not much, but it's more than I expected," Xavier interrupted. "More than I've had in some time." The meal that followed was the first Xavier had shared with others at his table since before his father's death. Emma chattered about the kittens she'd discovered in the barn, while Daniel peppered Xavier with questions about breaking horses. Joseph spoke more than usual, describing the progress they'd made repairing the damaged irrigation system. Throughout it all, Xavier found his attention repeatedly drawn to Kathleen. The way the candlelight softened her features, how she gently corrected Emma's table manners with a touch, the quiet efficiency with which she anticipated needs before they were spoken. Later, after the children had been sent to bed and Joseph had excused himself to check on their ailing mare, Xavier helped Kathleen clear the table. "You didn't need to do this," he said quietly. Kathleen paused, a plate in her hands. "Everyone deserves to be remembered on their birthday, Mr. Vaughn." "Xavier," he corrected. "After a meal like that, I think you've earned the right to use my given name." A faint blush colored her cheeks. "Xavier, then. And you may call me Kathleen, though most just call me Kate." "Kate," he repeated, liking how it felt. "Thank you. For tonight. For everything you've done since arriving." She looked up at him, something vulnerable flickering across her expression. "You saved us, Mr. Vaughn, Xavier. When you offered us work and shelter, you'll never know what that meant." "I think I might," he admitted. "This ranch, it's all I have left of my family. I was losing it. Still might." Kate set down the dish she was holding. "Joseph told me about the bank loan. 30 days isn't much time." "No, it isn't. But having helped these past weeks has made a difference. The irrigation repairs alone might save enough of the hay field to matter." She hesitated, then asked, "What will you do if?" "I don't know," Xavier admitted. "I've never lived anywhere but here." An understanding silence fell between them, two people acquainted with loss and uncertainty. Without thinking, Xavier reached out and briefly touched her hand where it rested on the table. "Whatever happens, I'm glad your wagon will chose my property to give out on." Kate's smile contained a sadness that Xavier couldn't quite interpret. "So am I," she whispered. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither dared name. Then, from outside, Joseph's voice called for Kate, breaking the spell. "I should go," she said, withdrawing her hand. "Emma has nightmares sometimes." Xavier nodded, suddenly aware of boundaries he'd nearly crossed. Of course. Good night, Kate. Good night, Xavier. Happy birthday. As she slipped out into the Montana night, Xavier remained in his kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of the first celebration he'd enjoyed in years. The confusion he felt wasn't just about his financial predicament anymore. In less than a month, the Lawsons had become essential to the ranch's operation, and Kate had somehow become essential to him in ways he couldn't afford to examine too closely. She was another man's wife. A good man, by all appearances, despite whatever secrets haunted their past. Xavier had enough problems without adding inappropriate feelings to the list. Yet as he extinguished the lamps and headed to his bedroom, he couldn't shake the memory of candlelight on Kate's face, or the fleeting warmth of her hand beneath his. "You've got a visitor," Joseph called from the barn doorway, his expression uncharacteristically tight. "Banker's here." Xavier wiped his hands on a rag and nodded grimly. The deadline for his loan payment loomed just 10 days away, and while the ranch's condition had improved dramatically since the Lawsons' arrival, financial miracles remained elusive. "Best get this over with," he muttered, following Joseph into the yard where Lawrence Whitaker sat primly on his gleaming black gelding. "Vaughn," the banker acknowledged with barely concealed satisfaction. "I was passing by and thought I'd check on my investment." Xavier bristled at the presumptuous phrasing, but kept his tone civil. "What can I do for you, Whitaker?" "Just observing," Whitaker replied, his gaze sweeping across the ranch. "I see you've acquired help. Curious, given your financial situation." "The arrangement benefits us both," Xavier said simply. Whitaker's gaze shifted to where Kate stood on the porch, watching their exchange while drying dishes. Something in his expression, a flash of recognition quickly masked, caught Xavier's attention. "Mrs. Lawson, isn't it?" Whitaker called, tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy. Kate froze momentarily, then nodded stiffly. "Mr. Whitaker." Xavier looked between them with growing unease. "You two are acquainted?" "Passingly," Whitaker answered before Kate could respond. "Small territories make for interesting connections." His smile reminded Xavier of a snake. "I'll be expecting you in my office on the 15th, Vaughn, with payment in full." After Whitaker rode away, Xavier turned to Kate. "How do you know him?" She avoided his eyes. "We've crossed paths. In town." "You haven't been to town since you arrived here," Xavier pointed out quietly. Kate's knuckles whitened around the dish towel she held. "Before then, when we first came to the territory." Before Xavier could press further, Joseph appeared at Kate's side. "Emma's asking for you," he said, his voice carefully neutral though his eyes conveyed warning. Kate nodded and retreated into the house without meeting Xavier's gaze. Joseph remained on the porch, his posture tense. "Whatever you're hiding," Xavier said evenly. "If it affects my ranch or my loan, I need to know." Joseph's expression hardened. "It's not what you think." "I don't know what to think," Xavier countered. "But Whitaker recognized your wife, and suddenly she can't look me in the eye." Joseph glanced toward the house before stepping closer to Xavier. "Kate worked briefly as a laundress at the hotel in Helena when we first arrived in Montana. Whitaker was a guest there. He made advances. She refused. That's all." The explanation seemed plausible, yet something in Joseph's delivery felt rehearsed. Xavier studied the man who had worked alongside him for nearly a month, who had proven himself capable and honest in all practical matters. "Is that the truth?" Xavier asked directly. "It's enough of the truth for now," Joseph replied, his voice low. "I gave my word we'd work hard for you, and we have. Some secrets don't concern you." With that, Joseph turned and followed Kate into the house, leaving Xavier alone with his doubts and the unsettling realization that his feelings for Kate had progressed beyond admiration into something deeper, something dangerous for a woman who clearly carried secrets and belonged to another man. That night, unable to sleep, Xavier stepped onto his porch. The moon illuminated the quiet ranch yard, casting long shadows from the barn and bunkhouse. Movement caught his eye, a figure slipping from the bunkhouse toward the corral. Kate, wrapped in a shawl, her hair loose around her shoulders. Xavier watched as she approached his favorite mare, speaking softly to the animal while stroking its neck. The intimacy of the moment, Kate alone with her thoughts in the moonlight, made him feel like an intruder. He was about to retreat when she turned, sensing his presence. For a long moment, they regarded each other across the silver-washed yard. Then, As if drawn by an invisible thread, Xavier found himself walking toward her. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked quietly, stopping a respectful distance away. Kate shook her head. "Too many thoughts." She turned back to the horse. "She reminds me of one my father had when I was a girl. Before everything changed." "What changed?" Her laugh held no humor. "What didn't?" "The war. My father's death at Antietam. My mother's remarriage to a man who—" She trailed off. "Life rarely follows the path we expect." "No," Xavier agreed, thinking of his own derailed expectations. "It doesn't." Kate looked directly at him then, moonlight catching in her eyes. "I'm sorry about today." "With Whitaker," Joseph explained. Something flickered across her face, relief mingled with regret. "Did he?" "Enough to make me dislike Whitaker more than I already did," Xavier said carefully. Kate's fingers traced patterns in the mare's mane. "There's more to it than Joseph would have told you. You don't owe me explanations." "Don't I?" she challenged softly. "You've given us sanctuary when we desperately needed it. You've trusted us with your home, your livelihood." Xavier stepped closer, close enough to smell the faint lavender scent she somehow maintained despite their rustic surroundings. "Trust goes both ways, Kate." She looked up at him, vulnerability and determination warring in her expression. "Whitaker worked for the bank in Pittsburgh where we lived before coming west. Joseph once worked there too. There was money missing, a lot of money. Joseph discovered evidence implicating Whitaker and others. He reported it. And Whitaker escaped punishment," Xavier guessed. Kate nodded. "Powerful friends. They turned it against Joseph instead. He was imprisoned for 6 months before new evidence emerged proving his innocence. By then, we'd lost everything. Our home, our reputation. When Joseph was released, we had no choice but to leave. But Whitaker found you again. We didn't know he'd come west until we saw him in Helena," Kate confirmed. "He recognized me at the hotel. Threatened to spread the same lies here that destroyed us in Pittsburgh." Xavier's jaw tightened with anger. "So you fled again." "We had nowhere else to go," Kate whispered. "No money, no references. Then our wagon broke down here, and you offered us work. And now Whitaker holds the note on my ranch," Xavier said, the pieces falling into place. "A convenient coincidence." Kate's eyes widened. "You think we planned this? That we're working with him somehow? Are you—" The question came out harsher than he intended. "How dare you?" Kate hissed, hurt flashing in her eyes. "We've worked ourselves to exhaustion helping you save this place. And I'm grateful," Xavier said quickly. "But you have to admit, the timing is unfortunate," she finished. "Nothing more." She wrapped her shawl tighter. "Believe what you will, Xavier. We've faced worse accusations." As she turned to leave, Xavier caught her arm gently. "Kate, wait. I'm sorry. It's just, I can't lose this ranch. It's all I have left." The anger in her eyes softened to something more complicated. "I understand what it means to fight for the only thing you have left." She hesitated, then added quietly, "We would never betray you, Xavier. Whatever you might think of us, of me, please believe that." Something in her emphasis on the word me caught Xavier's attention, but before he could respond, the bunkhouse door opened, spilling lamplight across the yard as Joseph stepped outside, scanning for his wife. Kate pulled away from Xavier's light grasp. "I should go." "Kate," Xavier said, keeping his voice low. "Thank you for telling me." She nodded once before walking back toward the bunkhouse, toward Joseph and the children, her family. Xavier remained by the corral, watching her go, torn between the relief of finally understanding the shadows that haunted the Lawsons and a new, more personal unease about his growing feelings for a woman whose life was already complicated enough without his unwelcome attraction. What neither Kate nor Xavier could see was the rider observing the ranch from the distant ridge, the moonlight glinting off brass buttons on a dust-covered uniform, a figure who would soon upset the precarious balance they had all been maintaining. 5 days before Xavier's loan payment was due, a letter arrived from the bank. Joseph brought it from town along with supplies, his expression grim as he handed over the official envelope. Xavier opened it in his kitchen, Kate preparing dinner nearby, while the children helped Joseph unload the wagon. The contents made his stomach drop. "What is it?" Kate asked, noting his expression. "Whitaker's calling in the loan early," Xavier said, his voice hollow. "Says there's been a change in bank policy. Payment required by tomorrow noon or foreclosure proceedings begin immediately." Kate wiped her hands on her apron and moved to his side, reading the letter over his shoulder. He can't do that. The agreement was for the 15th. Apparently he can, Xavier said bitterly. There's fine print about at the bank's discretion. This is because of us, Kate whispered, distress evident in her voice. Because he saw us here. Xavier shook his head. This is Whitaker being Whitaker. He wants this land for the railroad, and he's found a way to get it. What will you do? What can I do? Xavier folded the letter carefully, his movements controlled despite the anger and despair coursing through him. I don't have the money. Not by tomorrow. Not by next week either. Kate laid her hand on his arm, the gesture instinctive and comforting. There must be something. Could you seek an extension from the bank's main office in Helena? Or perhaps sell part of the land to save the rest? I've tried both, Xavier admitted. No one wants to cross Whitaker locally, and Helena's too far to reach by tomorrow. As for selling land, Whitaker's made sure everyone knows I'm in trouble. No offers except from the railroad, and they want the water rights, which means they want all of it. Kate's fingers tightened on his arm. You can't give up. Xavier looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then at her face, fierce with determination on his behalf. Something shifted inside him, a resolve forming from the ashes of his resignation. I need to speak with your husband, he said suddenly. Joseph? What? Because I have an idea, and I'll need both of you to help. When Joseph entered the kitchen moments later, Xavier was already pulling maps and documents from his father's old desk. Close the door, he instructed. What I'm about to suggest isn't exactly legal. Joseph exchanged a glance with Kate before carefully shutting the door. I'm listening. My grandfather built this house and established this ranch in 1851, Xavier began, spreading a faded map across the table. He came west with secrets, and with gold from California. Kate's eyes widened. Gold? Xavier nodded. Family legend says he buried part of his fortune somewhere on the property. My father believed it was just a story he told to keep my grandmother hopeful during lean years. But before he died, my father mentioned something that made me wonder if it might be true after all. Buried treasure, Joseph said flatly, skepticism evident in his tone. This is your plan? Not exactly, Xavier admitted. I don't know if the gold exists or where it might be. But Whitaker doesn't know that either. He tapped the map. What if we convince him that we've found evidence of the gold's location? Evidence compelling enough to make him delay foreclosure while we excavate? Kate caught on immediately. Buying time until you can secure funds elsewhere. Or until I can find something incriminating on Whitaker, Joseph added thoughtfully. The man has enemies. If we could connect with them, find proof of his misdeeds here as well as in Pittsburgh. Xavier studied Joseph with new interest. You'd help me trap him? After what he did to your family. Joseph's expression hardened with determination. Nothing would satisfy me more than seeing Lawrence Whitaker face justice. Kate moved to stand beside her husband, united in purpose. What do you need us to do? As the three of them bent over the map, formulating their desperate plan, Xavier felt something he hadn't experienced since his parents' deaths, the strength that came from not facing troubles alone. With the Lawsons, with Kate, beside him, even this impossible situation seemed less hopeless. What Xavier didn't yet realize was that their scheme would soon be complicated by factors none of them could anticipate. The arrival of an unexpected visitor, a revelation that would test Kate's marriage, and the true story behind his grandfather's legendary gold. The following morning, Xavier and Joseph rode into town, leaving Kate and the children to prepare the evidence they would need to convince Whitaker. Their plan hinged on an old journal of Xavier's grandfather, into which Kate was carefully inserting coded references to gold deposits and maps. At the bank, Whitaker received them with the smug confidence of a man who believed victory was assured. Vaughn, he acknowledged, barely glancing up from his ledger. Come to beg for more time? Or perhaps to surrender the deed and save us all the unpleasantness of formal foreclosure. Xavier forced himself to appear calm despite the rage simmering beneath his surface. Actually, I've come with information you might find interesting. This caught Whitaker's attention. Information? Joseph stepped forward, placing a leather portfolio on the banker's desk. Information about Xavier's grandfather, Thomas Vaughn, and the California gold he brought to Montana in 1851. A flicker of interest crossed Whitaker's face before he could mask it with skepticism. Gold. A convenient tale when facing financial ruin. Not a tale, Xavier countered, opening the portfolio to reveal aged papers and the carefully doctored journal. My family has kept this quiet for generations. My grandfather didn't trust banks, especially Eastern bankers. The pointed reference wasn't lost on Whitaker, whose eyes narrowed at Joseph. And I'm to believe you suddenly discovered this. Inheritance just when payment is due? We discovered evidence of its location, Xavier corrected. In the journal my father left me. We've begun excavation based on the coordinates. Excavation that would be interrupted by foreclosure proceedings, Joseph added smoothly. A shame, considering the potential value to the county and its leading bank. Whitaker's greedy nature warred visibly with his suspicion. Finally, he reached for the journal. I'll need to examine these documents. Of course, Xavier agreed. Though you understand I can't leave them. Family heirlooms. For the next hour, they watched Whitaker pore over the manufactured evidence, his initial skepticism gradually giving way to calculated interest. The journal entries, fabricated by Kate's steady hand, described gold caches hidden throughout the property, with cryptic references to landmarks that still existed on the ranch. This will require verification, Whitaker finally said, closing the journal. I'll need to inspect this excavation site. Naturally, Xavier replied. We'd be happy to show you our progress tomorrow. Which means, of course, that the foreclosure deadline must be extended. Whitaker's mouth tightened with annoyance, but greed won out. 3 days. I'll give you 3 days to produce tangible evidence of this gold. If you fail, foreclosure proceeds immediately. Outside the bank, Joseph released a tense breath. He took the bait. For now, Xavier cautioned. We have 3 days to either fabricate convincing evidence of gold or find something to use against Whitaker. 3 days isn't much, Joseph acknowledged as they mounted their horses. But it's better than none. They rode in silence for several minutes before Xavier voiced the question that had been troubling him since Kate's midnight revelation about their past. Why didn't you tell me about your history with Whitaker when you first arrived? When you realized he held my loan? Joseph stared straight ahead, his profile rigid. Would you have believed us? A homeless family with a convenient story about being wronged by the very banker threatening your livelihood. I might have, Xavier insisted. You've proven yourselves honorable. Joseph's laugh held no humor. Honor didn't save us in Pittsburgh. It didn't feed my children when my reputation was destroyed. He glanced sideways at Xavier. Besides, there are complications. Things even Kate doesn't fully know. Before Xavier could press for details, they crested the hill overlooking the ranch and spotted an unfamiliar horse tied outside the main house. Are you expecting visitors? Joseph asked sharply. Xavier urged his horse forward, suddenly uneasy. No. They galloped into the yard just as the front door opened. Kate emerged, her face pale, followed by a tall man in a dust-covered marshal's uniform. Xavier, Kate called, her voice strained. This is Marshal Bennett. He's looking for. She faltered. Joseph Lawson. The marshal finished, his hand resting casually near his holstered pistol as he surveyed the new arrivals. Though that's not the name he was using when he disappeared from Colorado territory. Xavier turned to Joseph, whose face had drained of color. Joseph? But Joseph's attention was fixed entirely on the marshal. Kate and the children have nothing to do with this, he said quietly. Whatever you want with me, leave them out of it. The marshal nodded. Mrs. Lawson and the children are not named in the warrant. Warrant, Xavier repeated, looking between them in confusion. What warrant? For the arrest of Thomas Jenkins, alias Joseph Lawson, the marshal explained, producing an official document from his coat. Wanted for embezzlement from the Denver and Pacific Railroad Company, 1883. The accusation hung in the air like gunsmoke. Xavier stared at Joseph, the man he'd come to respect and trust over the past month, trying to reconcile this new information with everything he thought he knew. Kate moved to Joseph's side, her face a mask of controlled fear. There's been a mistake, she insisted. My husband is Joseph Lawson. He's never been to Colorado. The conflict in Joseph's eyes told a different story. Kate, he said gently, take the children inside. No, she refused, gripping his arm. Not until this is explained. The marshal watched their exchange with the patient expression of a man who'd seen similar scenes before. Ma'am, I have witnesses who identified your husband as Thomas Jenkins, who disappeared with $10,000 of company funds 2 years ago. That's impossible. Kate whispered, though uncertainty had begun to creep into her voice. She turned to Joseph. Tell him it's impossible. Joseph's silence was answer enough. Xavier watched as realization dawned on Kate's face. The shock, confusion, and beginning of betrayal. You said Pittsburgh, she whispered. You said Whitaker framed you there. Whitaker did frame me in Pittsburgh, Joseph confirmed quietly. Everything I told you about that was true. What happened after, in Colorado? He closed his eyes briefly. I can explain, Kate. But not here. Not now. The marshal stepped forward. Mr. Jenkins, I'm placing you under arrest. You'll be transported to Denver to stand trial. Xavier found his voice at last. Wait. Before you take him anywhere, I need to understand what's happening on my property. He turned to Joseph. Are you Thomas Jenkins? Joseph straightened his shoulders, resignation settling over him. Yes. After Pittsburgh, after we lost everything, I took work with the railroad under a new name. When I discovered they were stealing land from homesteaders through falsified surveys, I took action. You stole from them, Xavier clarified. I recovered what they had stolen from others. Joseph, or Thomas, corrected. I intended to return the money to the families who had been cheated. But then Kate fell ill, and Emma needed a doctor. He looked at his wife, whose face had gone completely white. I used the money to save my family. I've regretted it every day since. The marshal reached for his handcuffs. That's enough conversation for now. No, Xavier said sharply, stepping between Joseph and the marshal. I need him here, just for 3 more days. This isn't negotiable, Mr. Vaughn, the marshal replied. I have a warrant. My ranch is about to be foreclosed on, Xavier explained rapidly. Joseph, Thomas, whatever his name is, he's helping me save it. 3 days, Marshal. That's all I'm asking. The marshal considered Xavier thoughtfully. You're vouching for a known fugitive? I'm vouching for a man who's worked honestly for me for the past month, Xavier insisted. A man with a wife and children who depend on him. Kate found her voice at last. Please, Marshal. 3 days. I'll personally ensure he doesn't run. After a long moment, the marshal nodded reluctantly. 3 days. But I'll be staying right here in town. And if he tries to flee, you'll both face charges for aiding a fugitive. He turned to Joseph. Don't make me regret this, Jenkins. As the marshal mounted his horse and rode toward town, an oppressive silence fell over the yard. Xavier looked at Kate, who stood rigid with shock, and Joseph, whose face reflected a mixture of shame and resignation. Inside, Xavier said finally, all of us. Now, in the kitchen, with the children safely occupied in the barn checking on new kittens, the full story emerged. Joseph, born Thomas Jenkins in Philadelphia, had indeed been framed by Whitaker in Pittsburgh, where both had worked at the same bank. After his release from prison, unable to find legitimate work with a tarnished reputation, he had changed their name to Lawson and taken his family west. The railroad job in Colorado was a fresh start, Joseph explained, his voice hollow. Until I discovered they were using the same fraudulent practices Whitaker had employed in Pennsylvania. So you stole from them, Xavier said, still struggling to reconcile the honorable man he knew with these revelations. I documented their crimes first, Joseph clarified. Sent evidence to the territorial governor. But when nothing happened, when I realized the same powerful interests protected them that had protected Whitaker. He looked at Kate. Then Kate contracted pneumonia. The doctor required payment up front. Emma was sickly too. I made a choice. Without telling me, Kate whispered, her first words since they'd entered the house. You let me believe we were starting over honestly. The pain in her voice cut through the room. Joseph reached for her hand, but she withdrew it. I was trying to protect you, Kate. If you didn't know, you couldn't be implicated. And now, she challenged, a marshal has come to arrest you. Our children will watch their father taken away in chains. How is that protection? Xavier watched their exchange with growing unease, aware that their personal crisis was now entangled with his own desperate situation. Without Joseph, their plan to stall Whitaker had significantly less chance of success. Without the Lawsons, all of them, Xavier doubted his ability to save the ranch at all. More troubling was the realization that despite Joseph's deception, Xavier believed his core motivation, protecting his family. The same family that had become surprisingly important to Xavier himself over the past month. Especially Kate. The marshal gave us 3 days, Xavier said finally, interrupting their strained silence. We need to use them. Kate looked up sharply. You still want our help? After learning all this? I need your help, Xavier corrected. And Joseph, Thomas, whatever name he uses, he owes me that much. He turned to the other man. You said you documented the railroad's crimes in Colorado. Do you have evidence that could implicate Whitaker too? A spark of understanding lit Joseph's eyes. Some. Not enough by itself. But if we could find similar evidence of his dealings here in Montana, then we might have leverage, Xavier finished. For both our situations. Kate looked between them, her expression shifting from hurt to calculation. Whitaker keeps records in his private office above the bank. I noticed it when we first came to town. Records we have no access to, Xavier pointed out. But I might, Kate said slowly. He still looks at me in ways that make his interest clear. If I were to encourage that interest, just enough to gain access to his office. No, Joseph said immediately, a flash of jealousy crossing his features. Absolutely not. You lost the right to dictate my choices when you decided lies were better than truth. Kate replied, her voice quiet but firm. I'm thinking of our children now, of their father facing prison. Xavier watched the exchange with mixed emotions, concern for Kate's safety warring with grudging admiration for her courage. And beneath it all, an inappropriate flare of jealousy at the evidence that despite Joseph's deception, Kate still loved him enough to take such risks. If we do this, Xavier said carefully, we all do it together. No more secrets, no more lies between us. Kate met his gaze steadily. Agreed. Joseph hesitated, then nodded. Agreed. As they began formulating their dangerous new plan, Xavier wondered if he was making the greatest mistake of his life, trusting a confessed thief and putting the woman he'd grown to care for in harm's way, all to save land that might already be lost to him. Yet something told him that whatever happened in the next 3 days would determine not just the fate of Double V Ranch, but the course of all their lives. The following day dawned clear and cold, a spring frost silvering the grass as Kate prepared to put their plan into motion. She stood before the small mirror in the bunkhouse, pinning her hair in a style she hadn't worn since Pittsburgh, elegant, with soft curls framing her face. You don't have to do this, Joseph said from behind her, his reflection joining hers in the glass. Since his true identity had been revealed, a new distance had grown between them, not just Kate's sense of betrayal, but the weight of decisions that could no longer be unmade. We've been through this, Kate replied, securing the final pin. Whitaker is coming to inspect the excavation site this afternoon. I need to be at the bank before then, while his guard is down. Joseph's face tightened with concern and something else, the same possessive worry that had once made Kate feel protected but now felt stifling. Xavier should go with you. A jealous husband and a desperate rancher? Kate shook her head. Whitaker would suspect immediately. I go alone. She smoothed down the blue dress she'd carefully mended and pressed. Her best, save for church and special occasions. It wasn't fancy by town standards, but with her hair arranged and a touch of rose water Xavier had found among his mother's belongings, Kate knew she could catch Whitaker's interest long enough to implement their plan. Outside, Xavier waited with the wagon. His expression when Kate emerged told her the effort she'd put into her appearance had achieved its desired effect. Something fluttered in her chest at the admiration in his eyes, a feeling she quickly suppressed. You look. Xavier cleared his throat. He won't suspect anything. Kate smiled tightly. That's the idea. The ride to town passed in tense silence. Xavier had spent the previous afternoon creating a convincing excavation site near the creek, enough to keep Whitaker occupied while Kate searched his office and Joseph documented the false surveys they suspected the banker had been using to pressure other ranchers. Remember, Xavier said as they approached the outskirts of town, if anything feels wrong, you leave immediately. The ranch isn't worth your safety. Kate glanced at him, touched by his concern. And what about Joseph's freedom? Is that worth the risk? Xavier met her gaze steadily. I don't know anymore, Kate. I want to help you, all of you, but I won't be responsible for putting you in danger. I'm choosing this, she reminded him gently. For all of us. In town, Xavier stopped the wagon a discreet distance from the bank. I'll pick you up in 1 hour. If you're not here, I will be, Kate assured him, though her confidence felt increasingly forced as the reality of what she was about to attempt sank in. The bank was quiet when Kate entered, just one teller and Whitaker himself, who looked up from his desk with poorly concealed surprise and interest. "Mrs. Lawson," he greeted her, standing. "What an unexpected pleasure. Is your husband with you?" Kate summoned a demure smile. "No, Mr. Whitaker. I came alone. I hoped I might speak with you privately." Curiosity and satisfaction battled briefly in Whitaker's expression before he gestured toward the stairs leading to his private office. "Of course. Please, come up." The office was exactly as Joseph had described from his banking days, meticulous, with filing cabinets arranged by property and client. Kate noted the large safe in the corner as Whitaker closed the door behind them. "How may I help you, Mrs. Lawson?" he asked, remaining standing rather than taking his seat behind the desk. The deliberate positioning put him between Kate and the door, a detail that sent a whisper of alarm through her. Kate maintained her composure with effort. "I understand you're visiting the ranch this afternoon to inspect Mr. Vaughn's discovery." "News travels quickly," Whitaker observed, moving closer. "Are you concerned about your living arrangements should the ranch change hands?" "Actually," Kate said carefully, "I wanted to speak with you about my husband." Whitaker's eyebrows rose. "Your husband? Or should I say Mr. Jenkins?" The confirmation that Whitaker already knew of Joseph's true identity sent a chill through Kate. "You know, my dear Mrs. Jenkins," Whitaker said with mock sympathy, "I make it my business to know everything about those who cross my path, especially those who have crossed me before." Kate's mind raced. "The marshal? You sent for him?" Whitaker smiled, cold and triumphant. "Consider it a form of insurance. Your husband derailed my plans once in Pittsburgh. I couldn't allow him the opportunity to do so again." He moved closer, forcing Kate to step back until she felt the edge of his desk behind her. "Though I admit, I didn't anticipate you would come to me voluntarily. I came to negotiate," Kate said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "The marshal agreed to delay taking my husband for 3 days. Surely there's an arrangement that could benefit everyone." "An arrangement?" Whitaker repeated, his gaze traveling over Kate in a way that made her skin crawl. "What exactly are you offering, Mrs. Jenkins?" Kate realized her terrible miscalculation. She'd expected greed to be Whitaker's primary motivation. Now, trapped in his office with his true intentions becoming clear, she understood that his desire for revenge, and for her, outweighed any financial consideration. "Information," Kate said quickly. "About the gold. About Xavier's grandfather." Whitaker laughed softly. "There is no gold, my dear. That pathetic story might have bought Vaughn 3 days, but we both know it's fiction." His hand came up to touch her cheek. "I'm more interested in what else you might offer to save your husband from a lengthy prison sentence." Kate jerked away from his touch. "I need to go. They're expecting me back at the ranch." "Not yet," Whitaker said, his tone hardening as he gripped her arm. "You came here seeking a bargain. I'm simply naming my terms." Terror and disgust washed through Kate, but beneath it, a cold fury began to build. This man had destroyed her family once before. He'd pursued them across the country, determined to take everything, again. And now he thought her desperate enough to submit to his advances. "My terms," Kate replied with sudden clarity, "are that you release my husband from all charges, extend Xavier's loan by 6 months, and leave this territory forever." Whitaker's grip tightened painfully. "You're hardly in a position to make demands." "Are not," Kate countered, gambling everything on her next words. "I know about the fraudulent surveys, Mr. Whitaker. I know about the bribes to county officials. And most importantly, I know about the embezzlement from your own bank, the same pattern you established in Pittsburgh." It was a shot in the dark based on Joseph's suspicions and their limited investigation, but Whitaker's expression confirmed they'd been right. His face paled before flushing with anger. "You know nothing," he hissed. "I know enough," Kate bluffed. "And unlike my husband, I've ensured the evidence is already in safe hands. If I don't return to the ranch within the hour, it goes directly to the territorial governor." For a tense moment, Kate thought she'd miscalculated fatally. Then, slowly, Whitaker released her arm. "You're lying," he said, though uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Are you willing to risk your position, your freedom, on that assumption?" Kate challenged, edging toward the door. "We both know how quickly fortunes can change, Mr. Whitaker. How easily the hunter becomes the hunted." Before he could respond, a commotion erupted downstairs, raised voices, then heavy footsteps on the stairs. The office door burst open to reveal Xavier, his expression thunderous. "Kate," he said, his eyes quickly assessing the situation. "It's time to go." Whitaker's momentary surprise gave Kate the opening she needed. She slipped past him to Xavier's side, heart pounding. "This isn't finished," Whitaker called as they retreated down the stairs. "Tell Jenkins the marshal will have him by sundown." Outside, Xavier hurried Kate to the waiting wagon, his hand protective at her back. "Are you hurt?" he demanded once they were moving. "Did he touch you?" "No," Kate lied, unwilling to increase Xavier's obvious fury. "But he knows about Joseph. He's the one who sent for the marshal." Xavier's knuckles whitened on the reins. "I suspected as much when I saw the marshal leaving the bank as I arrived." He glanced at her. "Did you find anything? Any evidence we can use?" Kate shook her head, the failure of their plan settling heavily upon her. "I didn't have time. He never left me alone in the office." She touched Xavier's arm. "I'm sorry. I've made everything worse." "No," Xavier said firmly. "You were brave to try. We'll find another way." The conviction in his voice touched something in Kate, a reminder of what had drawn her to him over the past weeks. His unwavering determination, his inherent decency despite the hardships he'd faced. So different from Joseph's secrets and calculated risks. As they approached the ranch, Kate spotted 3 figures near the barn: Joseph, the marshal, and, unexpectedly, a striking young woman in an expensive traveling outfit. "Who was that?" Kate asked, unease prickling along her spine. Xavier squinted against the sun. "I don't know." The wagon had barely stopped before Joseph approached, his expression grave. "You need to come inside. Both of you." In the main house kitchen, introductions were made quickly. The young woman, elegant, refined, and clearly wealthy, was Eliza Harrison, daughter of the Denver and Pacific Railroad's president. "Miss Harrison claims she has information about the charges against you." The marshal explained to Joseph, his tone suggesting he was as confused by this development as they were. Eliza straightened her shoulders. "Not claims, Marshal. I have proof." She removed documents from her satchel. "Thomas Jenkins did take money from the railroad company. $10,000, exactly as reported. What wasn't reported was that the money had already been stolen from homesteaders through falsified surveys and fraudulent claims. A scheme orchestrated by Lawrence Whitaker when he briefly served as the company's financial advisor." Kate gasped. "Whitaker worked for the railroad in Colorado?" After his difficulties in Pittsburgh, Eliza confirmed. "My father hired him on the recommendation of business associates. A decision he came to regret when Mr. Jenkins provided evidence of widespread corruption." The marshal studied the documents with growing concern. "These appear to be internal company records. How did you obtain them, Miss Harrison?" A faint blush colored Eliza's cheeks. "Mr. Jenkins sent them to me before he disappeared. We had become acquainted during his employment." Her gaze flickered briefly to Joseph. "I believed in his innocence, but it's taken this long to convince my father to acknowledge the truth and withdraw the charges." Kate looked at her husband, a new understanding dawning. "You and Miss Harrison were friends?" Joseph said quickly, though the guilt in his eyes suggested more. "She helped me document the railroad's practices. I trusted her with the evidence before we fled. And now she's here to save you," Kate observed, emotions too complex to name churning within her. Eliza turned to Kate, her expression earnest. "I'm here because it's the right thing to do, Mrs. Jenkins. Your husband took a stand when others wouldn't, including me, at first. He protected homesteaders who had no one else to speak for them. At what cost to his own family?" Kate asked quietly. The room fell silent, the weight of choices made and consequences borne settling over them all. Finally, the marshal cleared his throat. "These documents warrant further investigation," he acknowledged. "I'll need to wire the governor and my superiors in Denver." He turned to Joseph. "You're still under arrest until official word comes, but—" He hesitated, then unhooked the handcuffs from his belt and returned them to his pocket. "Given Miss Harrison's testimony and these documents, I'm willing to leave you in Mr. Vaughn's custody until I receive further instructions." Relief washed over Joseph's face. "Thank you, Marshal." As the marshal prepared to leave for town, Eliza approached Kate. "Mrs. Jenkins, I understand this must be difficult, but I want you to know that your husband spoke of you and your children constantly. Whatever else happened, his love for you was never in question." Kate nodded, unable to form words around the tangle of emotions constricting her throat. After Eliza and the marshal departed, promising to return the following day, an uncomfortable silence descended on the kitchen. "You should have told me," Kate finally said to Joseph. "About Miss Harrison. About all of it. I wanted to protect you," Joseph repeated, the explanation wearing thinner each time. "Stop saying that," Kate said, unexpected anger flaring. "You didn't protect me. You left me unprepared. You made choices that affected our entire family without giving me the dignity of participation." She looked at him directly. "That isn't protection, Joseph. It's control." Xavier, who had remained silent throughout the revelations, moved toward the door. "I should give you privacy to discuss this." "No," Kate said, surprising herself with the firmness of her tone. "You're part of this now. And we still have Whitaker to deal with. He's coming here this afternoon, expecting to see gold." "Gold that doesn't exist," Joseph pointed out wearily. Xavier's expression shifted, a new determination kindling in his eyes. "Maybe it does." Both Kate and Joseph turned to him in confusion. "What?" they asked simultaneously. "My grandfather's gold," Xavier said slowly, as if working through an idea as he spoke. "I always thought it was just a story. But what if it wasn't?" He looked at them intently. "My father mentioned something before he died, about the old well behind the spring house. Said grandfather had watered his legacy there." "You think your grandfather actually did bury gold on the property?" Joseph asked skeptically. "I think it's worth finding out," Xavier replied. "And I think Whitaker's visit this afternoon gives us the perfect opportunity to check." For the first time since the marshal had arrived the previous day, hope flickered in Kate's chest. Not just for their immediate crisis with Whitaker, but for the possibility of a future beyond it. A future that suddenly seemed less defined than she had once believed. As Xavier outlined his plan, Kate found herself watching him, his animated gestures, the intelligence in his eyes, the passion with which he defended his family's land. She thought of the past month at Double V Ranch, of quiet evenings and shared meals, of Emma's laughter as Xavier taught her to ride, of Daniel's pride when Xavier praised his work. She thought, too, of Joseph's deceptions and Eliza Harrison's obvious feelings for him, of the complex web of truth and lies that had brought them all to this moment of reckoning. Whatever happened next, whether they found gold or not, whether Joseph was cleared or convicted, Kate knew with sudden clarity that the careful life she had constructed was forever changed. And as her gaze met Xavier's across the kitchen, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, that whatever paths they chose from here, they would not be walking them alone. The abandoned well behind the spring house had been covered with weathered planks for as long as Xavier could remember. His father had warned him away from it as a child, claiming it was unstable and dangerous, a common enough precaution on a ranch with many hazards. Now, as Xavier pried away the boards while Joseph held a lantern, he wondered if his father's warnings had concealed a deeper purpose. "How deep is it?" Joseph asked, peering into the dark opening. 20 feet or so," Xavier replied, securing a rope to a nearby post. "My grandfather dug it when he first settled here, but the water turned brackish after a few years. They dug the new well closer to the house." Kate joined them, having settled the children with Eliza, who had returned as promised with news that the marshal was awaiting official communication from Denver. "Whitaker will be here within the hour," Kate reminded them. "If there's anything to find, we need to find it quickly." Xavier nodded, testing the rope's strength. "I'll go down. Joseph, you hold the lantern and keep watch for Whitaker." "Be careful," Kate said quietly as Xavier prepared to descend. Their eyes met briefly, concern in hers, reassurance in his. The well was narrow but not impossibly so. Xavier lowered himself carefully, the rope rough against his palms, the lantern light from above casting strange shadows on the stone walls. The air grew cooler and damper as he descended, smelling of earth and time. At the bottom, his boots splashed in several inches of stagnant water. Xavier held up the small lantern he'd brought, examining the circular stone walls. Nothing appeared unusual at first glance, just an ordinary abandoned well. "Anything?" Joseph called from above. "Not yet," Xavier replied, running his hands over the stones. "Wait." His fingers caught on an irregularity, a stone that protruded slightly more than its neighbors. When he pressed it, it shifted under his touch. With growing excitement, Xavier worked the stone loose. Behind it was a small cavity, and within that cavity, a metal box roughly the size of a thick book. His heart pounding, Xavier extracted the box and examined it by lantern light. It was made of iron, heavy and sealed with a simple latch that had corroded with age and moisture. "I found something," he called up. "Send down the bucket." Minutes later, Xavier emerged from the well, the box clutched securely under one arm. Kate and Joseph watched with matching expressions of disbelief as he placed it on a flat rock and examined the rusted latch. "It could just be documents," Joseph cautioned, "or personal belongings." "One way to find out," Xavier replied. Using a knife from his belt, he carefully worked the latch until it gave way with a reluctant groan of metal. The lid opened to reveal contents wrapped in oilskin, protection against the well's dampness. Xavier unwrapped the package with trembling fingers, revealing a stack of papers tied with leather cord, and beneath them, a canvas pouch that clinked promisingly when he lifted it. "My God," Joseph breathed as Xavier opened the pouch, spilling gold coins onto the oilskin. "Your grandfather's gold is real." "Not all of it," Xavier said, quickly counting. "There's maybe $500 here. But look," he indicated the papers, which he had begun to examine. "These are deeds, mining claims in California, and letters of credit from banks in Sacramento and San Francisco." He looked up, stunned. "If these are still valid, then you have more than enough to pay off Whitaker's loan," Kate finished, her eyes wide. "We need to verify these documents," Joseph cautioned. "Some of these banks might not even exist anymore, and even if the claims are valid, it would take time to liquidate them." "Time we don't have," Xavier acknowledged. "But we have enough here to convince Whitaker the rest exists. Enough to negotiate." The sound of an approaching wagon interrupted their planning. Kate quickly helped Xavier rewrap the gold coins while Joseph gathered the documents. "Remember the plan," Xavier said quietly as Whitaker's wagon appeared on the road. "We need him to believe there's more gold, much more, but that accessing it requires his cooperation." As Whitaker's wagon pulled into the yard, they were ready. The box partially resealed and positioned conspicuously on the porch, a few gold coins artfully displayed beside it as though recently examined. "Vaughn," Whitaker called, climbing down from his wagon with obvious reluctance. "I see Jenkins is still at liberty." The marshal must be growing soft. His gaze caught on the items displayed on the porch, his expression shifting from skepticism to sudden, intense interest. "Mr. Whitaker," Xavier greeted him with deliberate casualness. "Right on time to see what we've uncovered." Whitaker approached, unable to disguise his fascination with the gold coins gleaming in the afternoon sun. "You actually found something." "Just the beginning," Xavier confirmed. "My grandfather's journal was accurate, it seems. The first cache was exactly where he described." "First cache," Whitaker repeated, looking up sharply. Joseph stepped forward. "According to the documents we found with this sample, Thomas Vaughn transported his California earnings in multiple shipments. This," he gestured to the coins, "is merely confirmation that the journal entries are accurate." Kate had positioned herself near the box of documents, her fingers resting possessively on its lid. The full inventory lists specific locations across the property. Once the main cache is recovered, Xavier will have more than enough to satisfy his loan obligation, with considerable surplus. The naked greed on Whitaker's face confirmed they had his full attention. "I'll need to examine these documents myself," he said, reaching for the box. Kate subtly shifted it away from his grasp. "Of course, once the loan terms are renegotiated to allow sufficient time for proper excavation." "Renegotiated?" Whitaker's eyes narrowed. "The terms are fixed, Mrs. Jenkins. Or have you forgotten our conversation this morning?" "I remember it perfectly," Kate replied, her voice steady despite the color rising in her cheeks. "Just as I remember your admission regarding fraudulent surveys and embezzlement, practices you've apparently employed in 3 states now." Whitaker's face darkened. "Careful, Mrs. Jenkins. Slander is a serious accusation." "It's only slander if it's untrue," Joseph interjected. "The railroad in Denver has already acknowledged your creative accounting methods. That's why Miss Harrison is here." "Miss Harrison?" Whitaker repeated, genuine confusion crossing his features. As if on cue, Eliza emerged from the house, Daniel and Emma trailing behind her. "Lawrence Whitaker," she said coolly. "My father sends his regards, and his lawyers." The banker's composure cracked visibly. He looked from Eliza to the gold coins, calculations clearly racing behind his eyes. This is absurd. I've broken no laws. A jury will determine that, Eliza replied. Meanwhile, I believe Mr. Vaughn has made a reasonable proposal regarding his loan. An extension to allow proper recovery of his grandfather's legacy seems mutually beneficial. Whitaker's gaze darted between them, the trap closing around him becoming increasingly apparent. 6 months, he said finally. I'll grant 6 months extension at current interest. 1 year, Xavier countered. At reduced interest. And you'll dismiss all claims against Joseph Lawson or Thomas Jenkins, whatever name he uses. I have no authority over legal matters in Colorado, Whitaker objected. But you do have influence, Eliza pointed out. Enough to suggest to my father that pursuing charges against a man who exposed corporate wrongdoing might generate unwelcome publicity, especially when that same man has now discovered valuable mining claims that could benefit multiple parties. The standoff lasted several tense moments before Whitaker's practical nature asserted itself. He might be cornered, but he was still a businessman. 1 year, he agreed reluctantly. And I'll communicate with the appropriate parties regarding Jenkins. His gaze settled on the gold coins. I expect to be kept informed of all discoveries on this property. Of course, Xavier agreed smoothly. We're all partners in this endeavor now. After Whitaker departed, clearly unhappy but equally unwilling to surrender the possibility of profit, the group gathered in Xavier's kitchen. The relief was palpable, though tempered by the knowledge that they had gained a reprieve, not a resolution. Will the mining claims really hold up? Kate asked as Xavier spread the documents across the table. Some might, he replied honestly. They're dated 1851 to 1853, during the height of the gold rush. My grandfather's name is on all of them. Whether the mines are still productive or even accessible is another question entirely. It bought us time, Joseph said, studying a particularly ornate deed. Time for the charges against me to be formally dropped. Time for Xavier to find alternative financing. Time for all of us to decide what happens next, Kate added quietly. The unspoken question hung in the air. What would the Lawsons, or Jenkins, do once Joseph was officially cleared? Would they continue at Double V Ranch, or move on as they had before? Eliza broke the thoughtful silence. I should return to town. The marshal is expecting confirmation from Denver by telegraph tomorrow. She hesitated, then added, I've taken a room at the hotel for the week. There are details to finalize regarding the railroad's restitution. The look that passed between Eliza and Joseph was brief, but loaded with unresolved history. Kate noticed it, her expression carefully neutral as she thanked Eliza for her assistance. After Eliza's departure, Xavier excused himself to check on the livestock, leaving Kate and Joseph alone in the kitchen. The tension between them, simmering since Joseph's true identity had been revealed, finally found voice. You never mentioned Miss Harrison before, Kate said, her tone deliberately even. Joseph sighed, running a hand through his hair. There was nothing to mention. She was the railroad president's daughter. I was an accountant who noticed discrepancies. An accountant she clearly cared for, Kate observed. Enough to travel all this way, years later, to clear your name. Kate, Joseph began, then stopped, searching for words. These past years, everything I've done, every decision I've made, has been to protect you and the children. So you've said, Kate replied. Many times. But I'm beginning to wonder if some of those decisions were also about protecting yourself. From the consequences of your choices. From having to explain yourself to me. Joseph flinched as if struck. That's not fair, isn't it? Kate challenged quietly. You changed our name. Moved us across the country. Twice. Took money that wasn't yours. Cultivated a relationship with a woman you never mentioned. And through it all, you kept me in ignorance. Unable to help. Unable to prepare. Unable to choose. I was trying to give you and the children a better life, Joseph insisted, desperation entering his voice. Everything I did was for our family. Kate studied her husband, this man she had followed faithfully across the country, through hardship and uncertainty. She had loved him, trusted him, believed in him. Even now, she couldn't doubt his love for their children or his desire to provide for them. But something had broken between them, a trust that couldn't be easily repaired. And in its absence, Kate had glimpsed another possibility, a life where her voice mattered, her strength was valued, her choices were her own. I believe you love us, she said finally. I've never doubted that. But love without honesty, without partnership, it isn't enough anymore, Joseph. The implications of her words hung between them. Before Joseph could respond, the door opened, and Xavier returned, stopping short when he sensed the charged atmosphere. I should check on the children, Joseph said after an awkward moment. He looked at Kate, a plea in his eyes. We'll talk more later? Kate nodded, though uncertainty clouded her expression. After Joseph left, Xavier moved to the stove, busying himself with the coffee pot to give Kate privacy with her thoughts. I'm sorry, he said finally, breaking the silence. I didn't mean to interrupt. You didn't, Kate assured him. We were finished. For now. She watched as he poured coffee into 2 cups, his movements deliberate and careful, so different from Joseph's restless energy. What happens next, Xavier? With the ranch? With the gold claims? Xavier handed her a cup before taking the chair opposite hers. Whitaker will honor the extension. He's too greedy not to. As for the claims, I'll need to travel to California eventually, see what's still valid. It will take time. Time you now have, Kate observed. Yes. Xavier studied her over his coffee cup. The question is, what will you and Joseph do with the time you've been given? The directness of his question startled her. I don't know, Kate admitted. Everything has changed so quickly. The life I thought we were building. She trailed off, unable to articulate the confusion swirling within her. You could stay, Xavier said quietly. Here, at Double V. There's work enough, and the children seem happy. And Joseph? Kate asked, looking up to meet his gaze. Joseph, too, Xavier replied, though something in his expression suggested the offer cost him. If that's what you want. The unspoken question lingered between them. What did Kate want? After years of following Joseph's lead, of accepting his decisions as her own, the freedom to choose her own path was both exhilarating and terrifying. I need time, she said finally. To think. To decide. Xavier nodded, understanding in his eyes. Take all the time you need. The ranch isn't going anywhere now. He hesitated, then added softly, neither am I. The simple promise, so different from the grand declarations and elaborate justifications Joseph favored, touched something deep within Kate. Here was a man who had opened his home to strangers, who had risked his inheritance to help them, who had offered her choices instead of protection. As Kate gazed at Xavier across the kitchen table, she realized that the Lawsons hadn't just saved his ranch, they had saved something in him too. The lonely, withdrawn young man they had first encountered had gradually given way to someone more open, more engaged with life. Just as Xavier had given Kate something she hadn't known she was missing, the chance to discover her own strength. Whatever choice she made in the days ahead, Kate knew her life had been irrevocably changed by crossing paths with Xavier Vaughn. And as his eyes held hers in the quiet kitchen, she wondered if perhaps his life had been equally changed by her. 1 month later, the Double V Ranch stood transformed. Spring had given way to early summer, the hay fields rippling green and lush where irrigation repairs had succeeded. Cattle grazed contentedly in pastures secured against rustlers by Xavier and Joseph's vigilant patrolling. The house and outbuildings, neglected during Xavier's years of solitude, now bore fresh paint and repaired roofs. More profound than these physical changes, however, was the transformation within the people who called the ranch home. The telegram from Denver had arrived as promised, officially clearing Thomas Jenkins of all charges. The railroad, eager to avoid scandal, had even offered a modest settlement, enough to repay the borrowed funds and provide Joseph with a fresh start. Where that fresh start would take place had become the question occupying all their thoughts. Kate stood on the porch of the main house, Xavier's house, watching Emma chase butterflies in the front yard while Daniel helped Joseph repair a broken wagon wheel nearby. The domesticity of the scene belied the undercurrents of change flowing beneath their temporary stability. They look happy, Xavier observed, joining Kate on the porch. He stood close enough that she could feel his warmth, though he was careful, as always, to maintain a respectful distance. They are happy, Kate confirmed. Children adapt. It's adults who struggle with change. Xavier smiled slightly. Speaking from experience? Constantly, these days, Kate admitted. She turned to face him directly. Joseph has decided to accept Eliza's father's offer. A position with the railroad's accounting office in San Francisco. This wasn't entirely news to Xavier. Joseph had mentioned the possibility during their work together over the past weeks, a tentative olive branch extended after their initial conflicts. San Francisco is supposed to be beautiful, Xavier said carefully, studying Kate's expression. Different from Montana, but beautiful in its own way. So I've heard, Kate replied, equally careful. Joseph leaves tomorrow to secure housing and establish himself. Then he'll send for. She hesitated, the words sticking in her throat. He'll send for the children. Once he's settled, Xavier's breath caught audibly. The children, he repeated. Not you. Kate looked out over the ranch. This place that had begun as a desperate refuge and had somehow become more. Joseph and I have come to an understanding. After everything that's happened, we can't go back to what we were. He needs a fresh start. So do I. Kate. Xavier began, then stopped, seemingly afraid to voice the hope kindling in his eyes. What are you saying? I'm saying that sometimes lives intersect for a reason, Kate answered, meeting his gaze steadily. A broken wagon wheel. A desperate rancher. A family with nowhere else to go. She smiled softly. Providence has strange methods, but I've come to trust its wisdom. Xavier stepped closer, close enough now that Kate could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. And what does Providence suggest happens next? That depends, Kate said, her heart beating faster. On whether a certain stubborn rancher might have room in his life for a woman who's only now learning who she truly is. And her 2 children, who visit their father in San Francisco during summers. This rancher, Xavier replied, his voice rough with emotion, has discovered his life is empty without that woman and her children. Has been since the day they arrived. He reached for her hand, his touch tentative but sure. I love you, Kate. I think I have since you first started bringing meals to my kitchen. But I never thought, neither did I, Kate interrupted softly. Until suddenly, I couldn't imagine any other possibility. The distance between them disappeared as Xavier drew her into his arms, his kiss conveying everything words could not. The longing, the hope, the promise of a future neither had imagined when fate first brought them together. Later, as the summer sun dipped toward the western mountains, painting the ranch in hues of gold and amber, Xavier and Kate sat together on the porch swing. Daniel and Emma had helped Joseph load his trunk into the wagon for his journey the following day, a bittersweet parting tempered by the promise of regular visits and letters. Are you certain? Xavier asked quietly, his arm around Kate's shoulders. About staying? About us. Kate leaned into his embrace, watching as her children, soon to be their children, played a final game of chase with Joseph before darkness fell. I've spent my life following others' paths, she replied. First my father's, then my husband's. Always believing my role was to support, to follow, to accommodate. She looked up at Xavier, her expression serene with certainty. With you, I found my own path. One that runs alongside yours, not behind it. Xavier's smile held all the promise of the future spreading before them. A future built on honesty, partnership, and a love that had grown from the most unexpected beginnings. Then welcome home, Kate, he whispered, pressing a kiss to her temple. To our home. As darkness settled over Double V Ranch, the lights from the main house spilled golden across the yard, a beacon of warmth in the vast Montana landscape. Inside, a family gathered around the dinner table, a rancher who had hired a homeless family to save his land, only to have them save his heart instead. A woman who had found her strength and her voice in the most unlikely of places, and 2 children who had finally found the stability they deserved. Outside, the stars emerged one by one above the mountains, witnesses to the remarkable truth that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't buried in abandoned wells or hidden in mining claims. Sometimes they're found in the courage to begin again, in the willingness to trust after betrayal, and in the heart's capacity to recognize home when it finally, unexpectedly, arrives.